as much gravity and consequence as if they were treating about the distribution of kingdoms. I see contradictions that I cannot reconcile. On the one hand, enormous and useless expenditure. On the other, unparalleled meanness and littleness. Why do they not allow me to provide myself with everything instead of disgracing the character of the nation? They will not furnish my followers with what they have been accustomed to, nor will they allow me to provide for them by sending sealed letters through a mercantile house, even of their own selection. For no man in France would answer a letter of mine when he knew that it would be read by the English ministers, and that he would consequently be denounced to the Bourbons, and his property and person exposed to certain destruction. Moreover, your own ministers have not given a specimen of good faith in seizing upon the trifling sum of money that I had in the Bellerophon, which gives reason to suppose that they would do the same again if they knew where any of my property was placed. It must be, continued he, to gull the English nation. John Bull, seeing all this furniture sent out and so much parade and show in the preparations made in England, concludes that I'm well treated here. If they knew the truth and the dishonor which it reflects upon them, they would not suffer it. He then asked who was that strange general officer. I replied, General Meade, who with Mrs. Meade had arrived a few days back, that I had been under his command in Egypt, where he had been severely wounded. What? With Abercrombie? No, I replied, during the unfortunate attack upon Rosetta. What sort of man is he? I replied that he bore a very excellent character. That governor said he was seen stopping him frequently and pointing in different directions. I suppose that he has been filling his head with lies about me and has told him that I hate the sight of every Englishman. As some of his canaille have said to the officers of the 53rd, I shall order a letter to be written to tell him that I will see him. The 8th. A letter written by Count Montholon to General Meade, containing an invitation to come to Longwood, and stating that the Emperor would be glad to see him. This was given to Captain Poppleton, who was also requested to inform Mrs. Meade that Napoleon could scarcely request a lady to visit him, but that if she came, he should be happy to see her likewise. Captain Poppleton delivered this letter open to Sir Hudson Lowe. His Excellency handed the note to General Meade on the road to Jamestown. General Meade reined back his horse and spoke to Captain Poppleton nearly as follows: that he should have been very happy to have availed himself of the invitation, but that he understood restrictions existed and that he must apply to the governor for permission. And in the next place, the vessel was under way and he could not well detain her. This he begged of him to convey to Longwood. A written apology was afterwards sent by him to the Count, expressing his thanks for the honor done to him, and excusing himself on the grounds of the vessels being underway. The 9th. Napoleon complained of a headache, colic, etc. I wished him to take a dose of physic, which he declined, saying that he would cure himself by diet and chicken water. He said that General Meade had written an apology to Count Montholon, expressing his inability to accept of the invitation. But I am convinced, continued he, that in reality he was prevented by the governor. Tell him the first time you see him that I said he prevented General Meade from coming to see me. General Gargot and Montholon complained of the wine, which they suspected contained lead, as it gave them the colic, and desired me to get some tests in order to analyze it. Young Lascases and Piankovsky went to town today and had a conversation with the Russian and French commissioners. On their return, Pontiakovsky said that on their arrival, Sir Thomas Reed has sent orders to the lieutenant to accompany them, not to allow them to separate, and that he must follow them everywhere and listen to their conversation. While they were speaking to the Rosebud, a very pretty young lady, so denominated from the freshness and fineness of her complexion, one of Sir Thomas Reed's orderlies brought out their horses by his orders. with directions to inform them that their servant was drunk, and that if they did not leave the town directly, he, Sir Thomas, would confine him as he was a soldier and punish him for being drunk. That Las Casas, who was cooler than him, had desired him to demand an order in writing to that effect, but that in his passion he could not help saying that he would horsewhip any person who attempted to lead the horses away. The 10th, Napoleon, after some conversation touching the state of his health, said that while young Las Casas was speaking to the Russian commissioner yesterday, the governor was walking up and down before the house where they were, watching them. I could not have believed it possible before that a lieutenant general and a governor could have demeaned himself by acting as a gendarme. Tell him so the next time you see him. Napoleon then made some observations upon the bad quality of the wine furnished to Longwood, and remarked that when he was a sous-lieutenant of artillery, that he had a better table and drank better wine than at present. I saw Sir Hudson Lowe afterwards, who asked me if General Bonaparte had made any observations relative to General Meade's not having accepted the offer made to him. I replied that he had said he was convinced that he, Sir Hudson, had prevented him from accepting it, and had desired me to tell him that such was his opinion. No sooner had I pronounced this than his Excellency's countenance changed, and he exclaimed in a violent tone of voice, "He is a D, lying rascal, a D, black-hearted villain. I wish General Meade to accept it, told him so." He then walked for a few minutes in an agitated manner, repeating that none but a black-hearted villain would have entertained such an idea. Then mounted his horse and rode away. He had not proceeded more than about 100 paces when he wheeled around, rode back to where I was standing, and said in a very angry manner, "Tell General Bonaparte that the assertion that I prevented General Meade from going to see him," it's Italian, "is infamy, and tell him that. Tell him my exact words. Sir Thomas Reed informed me that Pionkowski's account of the transaction in town was false, that the only orders he had given to Lieutenant Sweetie were not to lose sight of them, that seeing this servant was so drunk that he could not sit on horseback, and he had sent his own orderly to assist in bringing the horses out, merely as an act of civility." The 12th, Napoleon, still unwell, complained of a slight colic, recommended him strongly to take a dose of Epsom salts. In a good-humored manner, he gave me a slap in the face, and said if he was not better tomorrow, he would take his own medicine, crystals of tartar. During the conversation, I informed him that the governor had assured me that he had not only not prevented General Meade from seeing him, but that he had recommended him to accept the invitation. "I do not believe him," said Napoleon. "Or if he did it, it was done in such a manner as to let the other know that he would rather wish he did not avail himself of it." I related afterwards to him the explanation given to me by Sir Thomas Reed of Pionkowski's affair. "What I complain of," said he, "is the disingenuous manner in which they act in order to prevent any of the French from going to town. Why do they not say at once manfully, 'You cannot go to town,' and then nobly will ask, instead of converting officers into spies and gendarmes by making them follow the French everywhere and listen to their conversation. But their design is to throw so many impediments in their way and render it so disagreeable to us as to amount to a prohibition without giving any direct orders, in order to enable this governor to say that we have the liberty of the town, but we do not choose to avail ourselves of it." I saw Sir Hudson Lowe in town, to whom I explained what I had said to Napoleon about Pionkowski, his reply, also the complaint made by General Gourgaud and Montsalon of the wine, and his request that I might procure some tests to analyze it. A few bottles of claret have been borrowed from Captain Poppleton for Napoleon's own use. The 13th, Napoleon, much better, had a conversation with Mr. Balcombe relative to the concerns of the establishment. A large quantity of plate weighed for the purpose of being broke up for sale. Information given of this by Captain Poppleton, says Sir Hudson Lowe, complaints made by Count Montauban and Cipriani of the state of the copper saucepans at Longwood, found them on examination to be in want of immediate tending, communicated the above to Major Gorker, with a request that a tradesman might be sent forthwith to repair them. A letter came from Mr. Balcombe to Count Montauban, containing the scale of provisions, etc., which had been fixed for their daily use according to the reduction ordered by the governor. Montauban refused to sign any more receipts. In the evening, Cipriani went to Captain Mounsell and requested of him to obtain for him a dozen or two of the same claret, which for 2 or 3 days they had borrowed from Captain Poppleton for the emperor, and which had been got from the 53rd mess, as that sent up from Jamestown had given him the colic, adding that they would either pay for it or return in equal quantity. This request was interpreted by me to Captain Mounsell, who said that he would endeavor to procure it. Received an answer from Major Gurker, acquainting me that he had ordered a new batterie de cuisine kitchen apparatus to be sent to Longwood. Sir Hudson Lowe and staff in camp, he was very angry at the request which had been made to Captain Mounsell to procure the wine. It appeared that Captain Mounsell had mentioned it to his brother and to the wine committee of the regiment, who proposed to send a case of claret to Napoleon. This was told to Sir George Bingham and reported by him to the governor, who sent for me and said that I had no business to act as interpreter on such an occasion. Major Goriker observed that the wine had been sent out for the use of General Bonaparte, and that he ought to be obliged to drink it or get nothing else. The 15th, wrote to Major Goriker to answer some points of his last letter, and gave him an explanation about the wine affair of yesterday, in which I stated that General Gorgo had affirmed that there was lead in the wine, and had begged of me to procure some tests for the purpose of asserting the fact, adding that I had acquainted Sir Hudson Lowe with this request the last time I had seen him in town. I hinted also that it was very natural for Napoleon to believe General Gorgo's assertion, who was considered to be a good chemist, until it was proved not to be correct. This letter I requested him to lay before the governor. The 17th, gave a minute explanation to Sir Hudson Lowe in person of the wine transaction between Captain Mounsell, Cipriani, and myself, with which His Excellency was pleased to say he was perfectly satisfied. This day, Major Goriker, in the course of the conversation with me relative to the provisioning of Longwood, said that Sir Hudson Lowe had observed that any soldiers who would attend at Longwood as servants to General Bonaparte were unworthy of rations. Sir Thomas Reed begged of me to try and get him some of Napoleon's plate whole, which he observed would sell better in that state than if it were broken up. The 18th, Sir Hudson Lowe at Longwood. Sir Thomas Reed told me that Bertrand had injured himself very much in his conversation with the governor, as the latter had found it to be his duty to write a strong letter on the subject to Lord Bathurst. The 19th, a large portion of Napoleon's plate broken up, the imperial arms and the eagles cut out and put by. Count Montauban applied to Captain Poppleton for an officer to accompany him to Jamestown for the purpose of disposing of the plate, with which the latter acquainted the governor forthwith by an orderly, received back in order to acquaint Count Montauban that the money produced by the sale of the silver should not be paid to him, but be deposited in the hands of Mr. Balcombe, the purveyor for the use of General Bonaparte. The 21st, Sir Pulteney Malcolm came up to Longwood in order to take leave of Napoleon prior to his departure for the Cape of Good Hope, which was expected to take place in a few days. Had a long interview and was received very graciously by Napoleon. The conversation was chiefly relative to the Scheldt, Antwerp, battles in Germany, the Poles, etc. Wrote last night to Sir Thomas Reed, by request of Madame Bertrand, to know whether permission would be granted that a phaeton, which had been purchased with Napoleon's own money and afterwards given by him to Madame Bertrand, might be sent to the Cape for sale by Sir Pulteney Malcolm's ship, concluded by requesting him to let me know before he applied to the governor if there was any impropriety in the request, as in that case it should not be made. The 23rd, received an answer from Sir Thomas Reed, announcing that the governor had given his consent for the sale of the phaeton, with a proviso that the money derived from it should not be paid to themselves, but deposited in Mr. Balcom's hands. 3 of Bertrand's servants, very seriously ill, heard a curious anecdote of General Van Damme. When made prisoner by the Russians, he was brought before the Emperor Alexander, who reproached him in bitter terms with being a robber, a plunderer, and a murderer, adding that no favor could be granted to such an execrable character. This was followed by an order that he should be sent to Siberia, whilst the other prisoners were sent to a much less northern destination. Van Damme replied, with great sang-froid, "It may be, sire, that I am a robber and a plunderer, but at least I have not to reproach myself with having soiled my hands with the blood of my father." Met Sir Hudson Lowe on his way to Longwood, who observed that General Bonaparte had done himself a great deal of mischief by the letters which he caused Count Mazarin to write, and that he wished him to know it, that by conducting himself properly for some years, the ministers might believe him to be sincere and allow him to return to England. He added that he, Sir Hudson, had written such letters to England about countless causes as would effectually prevent his ever being permitted to return to France. On his arrival at Longwood, the fowls which had been set up for the day's consumption were shown to His Excellency by Captain P. He was pleased to admit that they were very bad. The 27th, the commissioners came up to Longwood Gate and wanted to enter, but were refused admission by the officer of the guard, and their passes did not specify Longwood, but merely wherever a British officer might pass. The 28th, Napoleon, occupied in reading Denon's large work on Egypt, from which he was making some extracts with his own hand. October 1st, repeated to Napoleon what Sir Hudson Lowe had desired me on the 23rd. He replied, "I expect nothing from the present ministry but ill treatment. The more they want to lessen me, the more I will exalt myself. It was my intention to have assumed the name of Captain Muiron, who was killed by my side at Arcola, covering me with his body, and to have lived as a private person in England in some part of the country where I might have lived retired without ever desiring to mix in the grand world. I would never have gone to London nor have dined out. Probably I should have seen very few persons. Perhaps I might have formed a friendship with some savants. I would have wrote out every day and then returned to my books." I observed that as long as he kept up the title of Majesty, the English ministers would have a pretext for keeping me in St. Helena. He replied, "They forced me to do it. I wanted to assume an incognito on my arrival here, which was proposed to the Admiral, but they will not permit it. They insist on calling me General Bonaparte. I have no reason to be ashamed of that title, but I will not take it from them. If the Republic had not a legal existence, it had no more right to constitute me general than first magistrate. If the Admiral had remained," continued he, "perhaps matters might have been arranged. He had some heart, and to do him justice, was incapable of mean action. Do you think," added he, "that he will do us an injury on his arrival in England?" I replied, "I do not think that he will render you any service, particularly in consequence of the manner in which he was treated when he last came up to see you. But he will not tell any falsehoods. He will be strictly in adherence to the truth and give his opinion about you, which is not very favorable." "Why so?" replied he. "We were very well together on board ship. What can he say of me? Did I want to escape and mount the throne of France again?" I replied that it was very probable he would both think and say so. "Bah," replied Napoleon, "if I were in England now, and a deputation from France were to come and offer me the throne, I would not accept of it, unless I knew such to be the unanimous wish of the nation. Otherwise, I should be obliged to turn executioner and cut off the heads of thousands to keep myself upon it. Oceans of blood must flow to keep me there. I have made noise enough in the world already, perhaps too much, and I am getting old, and I want retirement. These," continued he, "were the motives which induced me to abdicate the last time." I observed to him that when he was emperor, he had caused Sir George Cockburn's brother to be arrested when envoy at Hamburg and conveyed to France, where he was detained for some years. He appeared surprised at this, and endeavored to recollect it. After a pause, he asked me if I was sure that the person so arrested was Sir George Cockburn's brother. I replied that I was perfectly so, as the Admiral had told me the circumstance himself. It is likely enough, replied he, but I do not recollect the name. I suppose, however, that it must have been at the time when I caused all the English I could find in the continent to be detained, because your government had seized upon all the French ships, sailors, and passengers they could lay their hands upon in harbor or at sea, because of the declaration of war. I, in my turn, seized upon all the English that I could find at land, in order to show them that if they were all powerful at sea and could do what they liked there, I was equally so by land, and had as good a right to seize people on my element as they had upon theirs.